Hi and welcome back to the Vintage Watch Collector. This is Roger and today we have a countdown of the top 10 vintage watches as worn by the famous and infamous. Let's begin the countdown now. Make sure to watch till the end to find out what's at number 1. At 10 we have the Casio F91W. This watch was launched in 1991 and the design remains unchanged as they're still making them today. That's coming up to a production run of nearly 30 years. It's water resistant, accurate and durable, plus the battery lasts for up to 10 years. As it's so cheap to buy new, it's probably not worth buying a pre-owned example, unless you can get one for a couple of bucks. The infamous person who wore this watch was Osama Bin Laden. It's not known why he chose it to wear, but it's likely to be because of the watch's robustness and durability, which comes in handy when you're living in caves in the mountains. At 9 we have the Hamilton Ventura watch, as worn by Elvis Presley. When you first see this watch, it's hard to believe that Hamilton first started producing them nearly 60 years ago. And even today the design looks futuristic. Elvis Presley owned at least 2 Hamilton Ventura watches, which he wore on many occasions, but most notably in the 1961 film Blue Hawaii. This watch is famous because it's one of the first electrically powered watches to be produced. Hamilton still produce Venturas today, and the design has evolved with time. Here is a comparison of a modern day Ventura compared to one of the originals. If you're buying one of the originals from the 1950s or the 1960s, then I'd recommend that you buy one in perfect working order, as broken ones will be hard to fix due to the difficulty of sourcing parts. At 8 we have the Heuer Monaco, as worn by Steve McQueen. The Heuer Monaco was first introduced in 1969 and was one of the first automatic chronographs to be produced. It was worn by Steve McQueen in the classic 1970s film Le Mans. The model that McQueen wore was the Monaco 1133, and the original Monacos ceased production in the mid-1970s. The company now known as Tag Heuer reissued the Monaco in 1998 with a limited run of 5,000, although they differed from the originals because the crown was placed at the 3 o'clock position instead of the original's 9 o'clock. Mint examples of the original 1133 model are increasing in value. They would now cost over $20,000 to purchase, whereas they would have only cost around $10,000 just a few years ago. At 7 we have the Omega Ultra Thin Dress Watch, as worn by JFK. John F. Kennedy owned a few watches, but one of his favourites was the one which he wore on his inauguration, the Omega Ultra Thin Dress Watch. This watch was given to him by his friend Grant Stockdale in 1960, before he became president. At the back of it he inscribed, "President of the United States, John F. Kennedy," from his friend Grant. The original JFK watch is now in the Omega Museum in Switzerland, after they purchased it for a staggering $350,000 in 2005. In 2008, Omega reissued its watch, virtually identical to the original on the outside, but with a limited supply of 261 watches. If you can get hold of one of these, you can buy one for about $5,000. At 6 is the Breitling Navitimer, as worn by Miles Davis. The Breitling Navitimer was first introduced in 1952 and is still one of Breitling's most popular models. The special features it has are designed for pilots, and they include a slide rule function around the perimeter of the dial. This allows the pilot to calculate speed and fuel consumption, as well as check for flight plans. The Navitimer was often worn by the legendary jazz musician Miles Davis. He was a man known to appreciate the finer things in life, including a fleet of exotic cars. However, his Navitimer remained constant in his life, and he was seen wearing it right towards the end of his life. Present-day Navitimers differ from early ones in the fact that they now use an automatic movement, whereas early ones used a hand-wound mechanical movement. Also, the case size has increased in diameter, in keeping up with modern trends. However, I still prefer the original's 42mm size, as it has enough presence on the wrist without being too brash. 5. Rolex GMT Master 1675 as worn by Che Guevara. The Rolex GMT Master was designed as a tool for pilots, as it featured a fourth hand that was used to set a second time zone, originally Greenwich Mean Time. So you may be surprised to learn that it was the watch of choice used by the revolutionary Che Guevara. Before you cast judgment on him, be aware that Rolex watches were designed to be precise timekeeping tools rather than luxury timepieces, which they have become. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, quartz watches had not been invented, and so Che would have needed an accurate and robust timekeeping instrument, which Rolex watches provided. In fact, Che was wearing his Rolex right up to the point when he was executed. His GMT Master 1675 is still in the possession of his captor, Felix Ishmael Rodriguez, right up to today. 4. The Seiko 6139-6002. The SIN 140, here's a quick look, is officially recognized as being the first automatic chronograph to be worn in space on Spacelab D1 mission in 1985. The only thing is that even though it's the first official chronograph to be worn in space, it's not actually the first automatic chronograph to be worn in space. This is because on the NASA Skylab 4 mission in 1973, Colonel William Pope unofficially took the Seiko 6139-6002 into space with him without seeking official NASA approval, as he was used to it for training during the previous 6 months. Pope reported that the watch worked without any problems in zero gravity. As a result of this, the Seiko 6139 has become affectionately known as the Seiko Poke by watch collectors. You can buy very good examples of the Seiko Poke for under $500, which makes it something of a bargain. At 3 is the Rolex Datejust. The Rolex Datejust is the very embodiment of the Rolex brand, because it offers the essence of Rolex with no added complications other than a quick date mechanism and the oyster case. One of the most famous Datejust wearers of the past was the 1960s American civil rights activist Dr. Martin Luther King. King wore a yellow-gold Datejust through the most important points in his life, such as being the youngest person at the time to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, right up to when he was assassinated. At first, the Datejust was only available in gold, but later Rolex introduced steel and two-tone editions. Present-day Datejust watches have also increased in size from the original 36mm to 41mm. Number 2. The Omega Speedmaster. The Omega Speedmaster was introduced in 1957 and was originally designed as a sports and racing chronograph. Its links are now firmly established with space missions after NASA in 1965 chose it as its official watch for all of its manned space missions. In fact, the Omega Speedmaster was taken on the Apollo 11 space mission to the moon. Even though Neil Armstrong is known as the first man on the moon, it was his colleague Buzz Aldrin who wore the watch whilst he took his first steps on the moon, as Neil Armstrong had left his behind in the lunar module. Aldrin wore the watch tied to the outside of his spacesuit on his right arm. At number 1, we have the Swatch watch, as worn by Justin Bieber. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Just kidding. At number 1, we have what I would consider the ultimate macho watch, the Rolex Submariner. Introduced in 1954 at the Basel Watch Fair, the Submariner has become one of the most iconic watches in the world. The design has evolved, but not changed drastically over time. Early models did not have the trademark crown guards or the Cyclops date window. These were innovations which would come later. The Submariner has been worn by many famous and influential people over the years, but I have chosen a fictional character, James Bond, as the famous wearer of this watch. The Rolex Submariner was worn in the first 4 James Bond films, and these films, more than anything, has influenced my love for watches. Watches can simply be used as instruments to measure the passing of time. But they can also be much more than that. Whether they are used as status symbols or symbols of friendship when they are given as gifts. If you have any comments about my list, or whether you think a particular watch should have been included, then leave it in the comments below. Until next time, this is Roger from the Vintage Watch Collector.